On behalf of our hosts, I want to welcome you to this plenary session on data integrity and voter information, preserving transparency and protecting privacy. My name is Maarten Halff. I am an electoral advisor with the United Nations in New York, and I will be your moderator for this session today. I think, irrespective of your feelings about the outcome of this week's elections, we have reached some calmer waters in our proceedings here. And I think this is useful for perhaps some deeper reflection on longer-term issues that have an impact beyond this electoral cycle. And as Bill Sweeney said on Sunday evening and again yesterday, this event, us being here together, is about learning from each other. And we have a great panel of speakers today with a rich diversity of experience from around the world. And I intend to leave plenty of time for a discussion afterwards. And I would welcome you not only to ask questions to the panel, but also to speak from your own experience, from the practices that you're familiar with from your country, so that we can compare each other's experience. The underlying theme that runs through this session, as well as others today and earlier this week, is the tension that exists between transparency and privacy in elections, and the balance that one strives for between these two. And we heard some of this already in a session on Monday. This was a session on campaign financing, for those of you who were there, where one of the speakers said, disclosure is for governments, privacy is for citizens. And I wonder how that statement might hold up in the context of this discussion today. I also want to draw attention to a session later today that also touches on transparency and open data, but more in the context of results and other electoral data. The session that we are here for today is really on the personal data of voters. So please keep that in mind when you're considering making questions or comments. I'm going to introduce the speakers. Starting on my left is Ms. Tova Wang. She's a senior democracy fellow at Demos, a public policy organization that through research and advocacy works towards the empowerment of people of all backgrounds to have an equal say in America's democracy and an equal chance in its economy. Ms. Wang has written and spoken extensively about electoral law, voting rights, and election administration. And I want to mention in particular a recent publication by Cornell University on voter participation and voter suppression in particular as well. We then have two highly experienced electoral administrators. Ms. Lefteria Luzi is the chairperson of the Central Election Commission of Albania, a function she's held since 2012, during which time a number of elections were held in Albania under her chairpersonship. She previously held senior functions in state organs, including as a member of the country's High Council of Justice. Ms. Luzi is familiar not only with her own country's experience, but also those of the broader Eastern European context, as she also serves as chairperson of the Association of European Election Officials, which is in fact one of the oldest regional associations of electoral administrators. Then next we have Mr. William Davies from Sierra Leone, another practitioner with a lot of direct and first-hand experience in conducting elections and managing voter data. He has a long record with the National Electoral Commission of his country, where he's been an executive secretary for the past 6 years. And in fact, in 2012, under his executive responsibility, the commission carried out the country's first ever biometric voter registration exercise. I think some 2.6 million voters were registered at the time. And I wanted to note that if you could look at Albania and Sierra Leone, they have quite different forms of voter registration. In Albania, it's a passive form of registration where voter lists are extracted from the National Civil Registry, and in Sierra Leone, an active one where voters come forward. So perhaps that could be a basis for drawing some comparisons and some reflection in our discussion today. And then on my far left, Mr. Niall McCann from our own UN family. He is the lead electoral advisor with the United Nations Development Program in New York, where he provides programming and advisory support to UNDP country offices around the globe. I think the list of countries Niall has worked on or in is really too long to mention here. I do want to leave some time for a discussion afterwards, so I'll skip that. Maybe just to say that more often than not, when I write to Niall by email, I will get an out-of-office message back from him saying that Niall is somewhere off resolving thorny electoral problems. So I'll leave it with that. So with that, I will turn to Tova for her comments, and then we will proceed down the table. Thank you.
Good morning. As the American in the room, I'm especially glad to be with you all this morning. I need to acknowledge that I myself am in a state of shock, depression, a little bit of fear for the democracy in my own country right now. But I have long been inspired by the work that people like you in this room do around the world in your own countries. And I'm building myself back up to fight like hell here too. I am going to talk about something that is somewhat positive in the United States in terms of our election system that's happening right now. And that is we are making advances in making our voter registration system more adaptable to the 21st century and technology. As you may know, the current system leaves out millions of Americans. There are tens of millions of Americans who are not even registered to vote and obviously didn't vote on Tuesday. We use a system now that is completely paper-based. People fill out a form on paper. They have to get their hands on a form. And then they have to either mail it or bring it to the proper location in order to register to vote. This is obviously a recipe for people not being registered to vote, for there being errors in terms of having manual entry of the information, for it being inefficient and prone to error. But this is the way we've been doing it all along. But there's now been starting to be a paradigm shift in the United States, and it is not just a little bit ironic that it is based on the voter registration system in many other countries in the world. We are now trying to move in several states towards a system in which the data that already exists in government databases is automatically and electronically transferred to the registration rolls. The government agencies are, like in many places, have all the information that they need in order for someone to be registered to vote, and we are now trying to move towards a place where that data is seamlessly conveyed to the head of elections to be included on the registration list. At the moment, this is really only being done at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and unfortunately that doesn't include everyone, but it does include most people. For a number of reasons, but the hope is that we will expand that to government agencies that are more directly serving low-income Americans in particular who may not have a car and may not be going to the DMV. We believe that moving towards this system, millions of more Americans will be registered to vote, and that this could change many, many things, since those who are not registered to vote are disproportionately young people and people of color and lower-income Americans. But this is also really, as I said, a transformation into the 21st century using technology. And the hope is that since we know that people, once they are registered to vote, do tend to vote, that this will make a big difference. So some form of this or another has now passed in 5 states. As you know, in this country, we do everything state by state and county by county and town by town when it comes to elections, for better and worse. Oregon, California, West Virginia, Vermont, Connecticut. It actually passed in Illinois but was vetoed by the Republican governor, but we're working on an override. And if you can say it's a silver lining, on Tuesday in Alaska, of all places, by a 2-to-1 margin in a ballot initiative, they voted in favor of having this type of a system in Alaska. But Oregon was definitely the first to go in this way, and it's a very good example of how in this country, despite it all, civil society can be very effective and work very well and make a big difference. It's a bit of a funny story. I don't know how well you know the United States, but Portland, Oregon is a kind of special city, a very progressive, very young, very hipster groups of kids. And it was one of these groups of kids back in 2002 that literally were sitting in a bar talking about the lack of political activism among young people and wanting to make a difference. And they started an organization called the Bus Federation, where they literally bought a bus and started driving all over the state, getting young people engaged in politics and registering people to vote. And it was through that experience that they realized that doing voter registration one person at a time on paper was never really going to make the difference that they wanted to see. And that had to be something institutional that needed to change. So what did they do? They looked at what other countries do around the world, and they realized that other countries have this kind of universal, I suppose what many in this room would call a passive registration system. And they said, why don't we do that here? It took many years for them to break through. They started their advocacy seriously in 2009. They had a lot of difficulty with the legislature. They had a great Secretary of State who was very in favor, secretaries of state in this country who are, by the way, elected on a partisan basis, run the election systems in our states. But they started working and building a coalition. It went on for years. They brought on more organizations, they brought on unions, and then they expanded even more to include more faces, such as communities of color, senior citizen groups, student groups, disability rights groups. And after going back and forth for many years on this, Oregon passed the first automatic voter registration bill in 2015, when the Secretary of State actually, by an accident of the governor being stepping down from office due to scandal, became governor and ended up signing her own bill. What's been interesting also is that these bills have passed largely on a bipartisan basis, not in Oregon, but in some of these other states. As West Virginia, I mentioned, is quite a Republican state. So now we have a coordinated group of civil society organizations, a lot of voting rights organizations, but others as well, who are working and will be working very hard throughout 2017 in particular to move towards having more states have this kind of a system, and not just having motor vehicles be the agency that produces the data, but other agencies as well. There are a lot of technical and policy challenges to doing this for our country. Very simple things like database compatibility between the state agencies and the voter registration roll. They don't talk to each other. The other thing is that at the other agencies besides the DMV, they have very bad database technology at the outset. Another thing that I'll talk a little bit more about is that they serve many non-citizens. And so since non-citizens cannot vote, to automatically transfer their information is problematic. We have very strong privacy regulations around the transfer of information with respect to certain government agencies, and so that's something we need to deal with. Some of these agencies don't ever require a signature, which you need, and some of them don't even require a residential address. So we're starting to look at trying to use institutions of public education, maybe the state tax authorities, which would get a lot of people, departments of corrections. So once people, as you know, we disenfranchise people in jail, but perhaps once they get there, they go out of jail, they can be registered automatically. Security is a major concern around this that we are addressing, especially with all the allegations and concerns and real concerns around hacking in this election. And so I have developed a model bill that we're trying to promote that includes a number of provisions that try to use automatic voter registration as a vehicle to build in stronger security mechanisms in our voter registration databases to protect against threats, to do risk evaluations, to do audits, to use software that detects anomalies, and also ensures that employees have the appropriate kind of access to the information, and that the actual physical equipment is protected. Another huge challenge is privacy. With the Department of Motor Vehicle, as well as these other agencies, that's a private list. In this country, the voter registration list is a completely public list. Anyone can get, it's different in every state, but you can get the voter registration list and most of the information that is provided on it, not stuff like your social security number, but your address and so on. And so that's a big issue, especially for groups who represent survivors of domestic violence. And so that's a major issue that we are confronting and trying to address through provisions in the bill to not have those people, and law enforcement and judges as well, have their information transferred and made public. And then there's also the concern, finally, about non-citizens. So this has become even more of a concern in the last 2 days because of, well, I'll leave it there. But it was already a problem or a concern that even departments of motor vehicles, we obviously provide driver's licenses and so on to people who are not citizens in this country. Many states provide driver's licenses to people who are not documented. And there's a real concern that if you transfer automatically and electronically the information from the DMV to the registration list, that people who are not citizens will get on the registration list and be subject to deportation and jail. So we have been taking a number of steps to try and implement this reform while making sure that that doesn't happen to a single person. And we're trying to develop mechanisms that the DMV and other agencies would have to follow to absolutely ensure that someone who's not a citizen never gets transferred onto the registration list. And then on top of that, I've developed with immigration lawyers language for these state laws that would hold the person who was put on the registration list through no action of their own not liable and not responsible in any way under the law, and not deportable for having been put on the registration list. We hope that we will be able to make more progress on that issue, which is obviously a little bit unique to this country in some ways because, as you know, we don't have a national registry of any kind. We don't track people in that sense, and people don't have national ID cards or residency cards. And I'll just conclude by noting the irony of our just embarking on this right now. Obviously the United States was very involved in putting together the voting system in Iraq after the war, along with the UN and a bunch of other countries. And it's not lost on many of us that they actually created a system in which they used the food cards, the public distribution system database as the basis for the voters list. It was partially out of necessity, but they've continued to do that. And so that they basically have this kind of automatic system in Iraq that we, along with other countries in the UN, set up for them, but we don't have it in our own country. And as you know, throughout Europe and throughout the world, there's a International IDEA report that most countries have this type of automatic registration, universal registration, where people are registered to vote normally upon turning 18. And we're not even close to approaching that, but we are working hard to do that. My hope is that if we can get more people registered to vote and overcome some of the challenges to doing so that I've discussed, that we will have more participation in this country and public policy and elected officials who reflect the true diversity of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Tova. I'll turn over to our next speaker, Ms. Lucy.
Okay. It's on? Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for this event. And I am happy that I am here and will share with you the Albanian experience in two topics: monitoring of electronic voter registration and fast and transparent transmission of the election result. In 1991, Albania came out from a 50-year communist dictatorship where elections were held only with the participation of the Communist Party. Albania continues to be a country of democracy in progress. Pluralist elections only have a 25 years tradition. As a consequence, there is still a lack of confidence between the participating parties in elections. Central Election Commission, as a body that prepares, supervises, directs and verifies all aspects that have to do with the election until an announcement of the final results, aims to make the process much more reliable. CC performs operations based on transparency and develops this in the presence of the parties involved in this process. Central Election Commission not only facilitate the process, but to make it more transparent, has emphasized, among other things, the use of information technology. All citizens having the right to vote are presented in the list of voters in our country without having to submit preliminary requests to be included in this list. It's called passive voter registration. The right to vote belongs to Albanian citizens who have reached the age of 18, even on election day. With the actual electoral law, the voters are included in the list of voters of the polling station where it is registered his permanent addresses, residence. In Albania, the citizen is registered since birth in a register which is administered by the Office of the Civil Status, which act according to the law on civil status. The data of citizens are included in the address of the residence. If case of the citizens change the residence, it is obliged by law to make relevant changes in a civil status offices. The civil service is a service performed by central government to be administered by the Ministry of Interior and delegated to local governments. Until 2003, the voter list was prepared by the CEC in cooperation with the offices of the Civil Registry, and the process was completely manual. The civil offices, under a procedure defined by the CEC, sent the information on paper to CEC for every citizen who had the right to vote. CEC processed this information electronically in a database through an application and generate the list of voters for each voting center according to local government units. Citizens during the communist period in Albania, among others, had the restriction of freedom of movement within the country and abroad. With the beginning of the democratic processes in Albania, there were movements of massive population within the country which were not always reflected in the records of civil registry. This situation greatly complicated the preparation of voter lists and their involvement, especially in the voting centers. Under these conditions, the legal provisions were amended several times to enable the regulation of phenomena of informal citizens' movement. One of the problems of that period were also the duplication in the voter list, inclusion of persons who did not live anymore, dead persons, the inclusion on the voter list of the voting centers without specific residence of voters, etc. In those years, the quality of the voter list was ranked on the priority issues in electoral process. Since 2005, the compilation of the voter list passed entirely to the Civil Register Service, local government offices, and at the General Directory of Civil Status at the central government. The role of monitoring the process was given to the Central Election Commission. The setting up of the National Register of Civil Status electronically in 2007 has facilitated the compilation of voter lists. Nowadays, every Albanian citizen is registered electronically with a series of personal data. These data are defined by law as the data called electoral component, whereby automatically is generated in the list of the voter. Electoral component: name, paternity, maternity, surname, date of birth, personal identification number, nationality, code of residence, gender. Not all the data of electoral constituencies are published. The process of compilation of the list of the voters is very transparent. It begins no later than 9 months before the end of the mandate of the body that will be elected. A month after the beginning of this process, it is published in paper in the offices of Civil Registry and electronically on the website what is called extract of the election component, preliminary list of the voters. Its publication is repeated periodically every 30 days until the announcement of the final list voters. Each publication should reflect the changes that are made on electoral components in the National Register of Civil Status from the preceding publication until the new publication. Chairman of the local government unit shall issue a notification in writing to every voter included in the extract of electoral components. The written notification contains the voting center, its location and address, and the serial number of voters on the voter list of his voting center. The preliminary list of the voters, it is subject to a review process based on the demands of voters. If the voter is not approved his request to change the electoral components, he may appeal to the court, whose decision is decisive. After the process of reviewing of the preliminary list, the registrar's office compiles the list of voters for each polling station no later than 40 days before the election. The list is approved by the chairman of the respective local government, and it is published at any voting center and, of course, in the website of the CEC. After this period, the voter list does not change under any circumstances and for any reason. Software is built in a way that does not allow any change in the voter list after the deadline, regardless of changes of the component in civil registers. After the publication of the list of the voters, the voter finds that the electoral components contains inaccuracies or is not registered in the list of voters of the polling units of his residence, or not registered at all in any of the lists of the municipality where he has a residence, he has the right to submit a request to the appropriate district court to 24 hours before the election. If the courts give the rights voters, the voting day he approaches the voting center with the court decision. Voter list and the electoral components extracts are made available to the elector subject at their request and without charge by the respective mayor and or the General Directorate of Civil Status. Elected subjects also, at their request without charge, can receive from the Director General of Civil electronic copies of voter list or extract of electoral components nationwide whenever they are updated and published. Electronic copy draft in such a way to allow cross-searches and comparison of data. Throughout the process of preparing the list of the voters is headed by the minister under its civil register service bills that are issued. The minister has under supervision the General Directorate of Civil Status, which direct and control the action taking place in the National Civil Register in the civil offices at municipalities. CEC supervise the drafting process of voter list, asking information from the General Director of Civil Status of local governments to implement the guidelines laid down by the Electoral Code and the Law on Civil Status. CEC oversight this process by appointing 2 technical auditors to verify the transactions in the database of National Civil Register. The right to nominate for each technical audit belongs, respectively, to Chairman and Vice Chairman of the CEC after consultation with the CEC representatives of the largest party of the majority and the largest minority. Technical auditors submit an audit report each month to the CEC for audit findings, according to the tasks set by the CEC or for issues related to the implementation of legislation related to the civil registers. This way of preparing of the list of voters in Albania, where many actors are involved in process, including voters, has made transparent and credible this process to competing parties, has disagreed inaccuracies made in the past which have been disturbing to the electoral process. In recent election, the local election of 2015, in order to summarize the problems encountered during the supervised preparation of the voter list by the CEC, where the existence in the voter list of voter duplication. The first report of the audit technical duplicate digits for voters was 3,900, or 0.12% of the number of voters in the whole country. In the final list, this number was reduced in 1,191 duplicated, or 0.04%. In the election of 2003, these figures were 0.89%, belonging to the preliminary list 0.2%. In the that final, the cleaning process of voter list made from the Directory of Civil Status and Civil Register offices from multiply records, duplicate, is continuous in non-election period. This number continuously comes be decreasing. The existence still in the voter list of voter without source location, addresses of voters. Code of residence shall establish the polling station for each voter. Voters without residence code are mainly those who have emigrated abroad. Despite the efforts made by local governments, without the code number of voters is still high. In the final list of voters in the last election, 300,506 voters, or 8.92% lacked this code of all voters nationwide. The project undertaken by the government for the register of migrants hopes to reduce the number of voters without residence code in the future. This is the topics for the register. Now I wanted to talk a little bit for the transparent and reflection of the election results. In recent years, with financial support from USAID and technical support from IFES, CEC of Albania has started and is in the process of completing the establishment of System Integrated Management Information Electoral. Election Integrated Management Information System is a system increase transparency and integrity of data in the process of issues the election result and an important place. Since 2009, Albania counting of votes is done in voting centers, but not concentrated in counting votes. Currently, 19 across the country is built on an infrastructure that enables full transparency to see attendance each ballot in the process of evaluating and counting. Ballot counting center has up to 10 tables of vote counting. On each table is placed a camera that allows the emergence of ballots in monitor and recording, storing them throughout the process. All equipment of ballot counting centers, servers, computers, cameras, monitors, are manageable in computer network which is connected via web servers of CEC. Immediately after tabulation of the result of each voting center through a procedures approved by the CEC, the transmission of the result is realized in the Central Election Commission server. In the 2015 election, except CEC election result, provides information and participation of voters expressing this result according to gender. The whole process of counting the ballot managed by the Commission of Electoral Administration Zone CAZ through the participation of counting groups. Module calls result consolidation, manages entry, control, and transmission of result by the CEC to ballot counting center. The results are sent electronically to the server of the CEC through a second module, election night results, published as preliminary election result in the CEC meeting hall and on the website. In any case, information is accompanied with the total number of voting centers in the respective electoral zone and the number of voting centers which the calculated result is given and the fact that the result is preliminary. This process continues until the end of counting for the respective electoral zone. With the establishment and operation of this system, the CEC in Albania is the only and the first source of information for media, the public, and any interested party. A summary table of the result for any constituency is printed from the database of preliminary result and after being controlled is approved by the CAZ. Database result created by the transmission of preliminary result also serves to extract the official election results. If during the entry and transmission of preliminary results would apply strictly the procedures provided in the Act of the CEC, the accuracy of the result is guaranteed. This way of acting from one election to another has been improving, increasing reliability of electoral subject and the public to the system and the public and publication of the preliminary results. To correct the inaccuracy CEC, before adopting the official result, mainly on its own initiatives or at the request of electoral subject, shall check the accuracy of the database of the results by comparing the original tables of result filled by groups counting. During the entry process, transmission and publication of the election result has been attacks from outside the system which are faced without consequences. CEC intends in the future to increase the accuracy for entry of preliminary result in the system and strengthen the security of all information technology system for this process with hardware and software. CEC intends that before the next election to the Assembly in June next year to finalize election integrated management information system with all the relevant modules. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning. I will briefly talk about the management of electoral data within the context of Sierra Leone as a country. Specifically, I will talk about how the National Electoral Commission in Sierra Leone manages electoral data, keeping in view the need to have a good balance between having transparent and credible electoral systems on one hand, and also ensuring privacy and confidentiality over the information generated from these electoral systems on the other hand. As a way of a quick background, sorry about that. As a way of a quick background, Sierra Leone is relatively a small country in West Africa. Population-wise, at the end of 2015, the country conducted a national population census, and the provisional figures so far indicate that we have just over 7 million people in Sierra Leone. In terms of key elections in Sierra Leone, we have three main types of elections. The first is presidential. It has a tenure of 5 years, and it's a two-round system. The first round requires a 55% threshold. If no candidate attains the 55% threshold, then it will go into a second round of runoff between the two best candidates in the first round. We also have a parliamentary system. It has an electoral cycle of 5 years, similar to that of the president. Its voting system is simply the first past the post. And we also conduct local council elections. They have a tenure of 4 years, and the voting system is also the first past the post. In 2012, the National Electoral Commission, for the first time in Sierra Leone, conducted voter registration using biometric voter registration technology, and at the end of that process, we were able to register just about 2.7 million voters. Since I'm talking about the management of electoral data, the National Electoral Commission basically maintains electronic electoral data that spans across the entire electoral process in Sierra Leone. But for the purpose of this discussion, I will limit it to two main electoral systems, i.e. the voter registration system, for which we have an electronic database, and also the election results system. We also have an electronic database for that. Now, having these electronic electoral databases, in terms of what guides the Commission to keep a good balance between transparency of the system and also confidentiality of these systems in terms of information generated from the systems, we are guided by two sets of frameworks. The first is the electoral legal framework, for which we have detailed electoral laws that guide the processes of voter registration and also that of results processing. But the laws cannot cover each and every detail of the electoral process. So there are areas wherein the law can be vague, and also there are areas wherein the law is silent. In these instances, the Commission is guided by internal policies and regulations that are adopted in order to ensure that we keep a good balance between transparency and confidentiality. Now, I'll quickly turn the discussion to that of the voter registration system. We have specific laws around the details in terms of registering of voters. Basically, the laws detail the personal details that should be collected by the National Electoral Commission. Also, we have specific laws on exhibiting or displaying the provisional or the draft voter register. At the end of the field data capture, we come back with all of the details, the bio details of registrants to the National Data Center, and the back-end data processes are conducted. And the output of that process is to have a provisional voter register. The law requires that the provisional voter register should be displayed. I'm sure the sense or the spirit of the law is to ensure that the process is open and transparent so that people can be able, they'll have the opportunity to go and check their own personal details, and also they can make objections or claims, and we may also have counterclaims. For instance, basically the registration law in the Constitution is saying that as long as you're a citizen and at least 18 years old and of sound mind, these are the three conditionalities, then you are eligible to be registered. So someone may come up and look at the provisional list and make a claim that you are not a Sierra Leonean, or that you are not yet 18, or that there are some lunacy issues with a particular person. So the law is clear about the display or the exhibition of the provisional register. And basically the information we display, it includes the name of the registrant, the date of birth of the registrant, which indicates the age of the registrant, the names of the father and mother of that particular registrant, and also the photo of the registrant. So basically, all or most of the personal details captured by the National Electoral Commission with respect to a particular registrant are displayed. So there's nothing people can do in terms of privacy in this particular area, because the law is clear that the provisional list must be displayed. And also we have specific laws about the certification of the voter register. After the register will have been exhibited, claims, counterclaims, objections, revisions. Before revisions, inquiries will first of all be held, and then the revising officer will make a decision, and then the register will be revised accordingly. We'll then come back with the revision notes and update the register, and then we'll have a final certified voter register. But so far we've looked through the law books, the electoral laws. There is virtually no law that is talking about the publication of the certified final voter register. The laws are only talking about to display or to exhibit the provisional or draft register. So this is where the Commission comes in with another set of framework in terms of internal policies and regulations. In 2012, because there was some kind of apprehension from the political parties, the two main political parties, because the technology was new, people were in doubt whether the registration process will be successful, considering the infrastructural status of Sierra Leone. So even though there is no law saying that we should publish the final voter register, the political parties were clamoring to have copies of the final voter register. In fact, I could recall that at the point of registering registrants in the field, agents of political parties, even though there are no laws talking specifically about observers or agents of political parties and candidates to observe the process, yet still the commission allowed that agents of political parties go to the various registration centers and they observe the process, but they moved one step ahead. They did not only go to observe, they did what we call parallel registration. They were all given ledgers and pens, and they were like also registering people when the people were leaving the registration center. They wanted to have some kind of a duplicate register to cross-check against the register that the commission will finally bring out. For that, the commission saw it as it was a step too far, because we, as the National Electoral Commission, we have the mandate to directly register citizens. So as an observer, you can go to the registration centers. You can take notes, take statistics in terms of how many people have come in and have gone through the process of registering, rather than accosting or approaching people when they leave the registration center. You ask for their personal details in terms of their names and other details, which we worked as a commission with the security sector, the Sierra Leone police, and we were able to put that under control. So as I was saying, there are no specific rules in terms of can political parties monitor the registration process, but the commission used its internal policy framework to allow or to accredit political party agents so that they can observe, and other advocacy groups, including civil society groups, to monitor or observe the process. Now, I can say something about a practical story which I experienced in 2015. Of course, this registration happened in 2012. A member of the public visited my office and made an inquiry whether we can release the residential address of a particular woman. Of course, the answer was no outright, but the story behind the inquiry was that this man who came into my office was a relative of a man who had died in 2015. This thing happened, the meeting happened in 2015. So the man who, according to the man who came into my office, he was saying that the deceased had died intestate without leaving a will. And the deceased was a divorcee. He was divorced from his wife, and they had 2 grown-up children. But at the time of death, the divorcee he was cohabiting with a partner or a mistress. Now, the deceased died intestate, and in Sierra Leone, there is a law that is saying that if a man and a woman cohabit for up to 5 years, then customarily they are deemed to be married. So the surviving partner was now putting a claim that she's entitled to the estate of the deceased. But she had to prove that she had been cohabiting with the deceased for at least 5 years. So the man, of course, who came into my office was like on the side of the surviving grown-up children. They are of the opinion that they had not been cohabiting up to 5 years, but they too had the onus to prove that the surviving partner had not been cohabiting with the deceased for up to 5 years. So they wanted, and they were kind of sure that this lady would have given her own personal residential address instead of the residential address of the deceased. So they wanted us to give the residential details of this particular lady or partner. So of course we refused because, I mean, it's now an issue of confidentiality or privacy in terms of the details of someone else, and especially within the viewpoint that the person has not given consent for her details to be released. What happened some few weeks after, we received a letter from the attorney of the surviving grown-up children requesting officially the commission to provide the residential address of this particular lady, saying that there was an ongoing litigation in the High Court about the matter I have just explained. And the attorney in the letter referenced a particular act. It's the Right to Access Information Act. This act was passed in 2013. And basically this act is saying that every person in Sierra Leone has rights to access information held or controlled by a public authority, and by definition, the National Electoral Commission falls within the category of a public authority. So he was now saying that by reference of this section, section 2, you should give us the details, the residential details of this particular woman. In fact, by then the commission did not have a copy of the act, so we obtained a copy of the act and read through it. But we also noted that there was a provision for an exemption, which is saying that the duty on the part of the public authority to disclose information does not apply if it requires unreasonable disclosure of personal information. So in a way, we were able to also reply and reference that particular section, that we think that our duty to provide information does not apply here, since we're of the opinion that this particular request requires unreasonable disclosure of personal information. So these are some of the personal, some of the practical instances in terms of getting a good balance between the transparency and credibility of systems versus the confidentiality over the information we generate from the systems. So now what the Commission is basically planning to do going forward, because we are having elections in 2018, is not only to give copies of the electronic copies of the voter register to political parties, because that was what we did in 2012. Since they clamored to have a copy, we gave them electronic copies, but we ensured that it was an abridged form showing only the name and the registration centers, which end up being the voting centers. So we did not give the full details, personal details of individual. So going forward in 2018, we also plan to share the electronic copies as we did in 2012. But this time around, we now have a website. We are planning to upload the abridged or the filtered version of the voter register on our website. We also have to be careful because not to display too much information. Age also is a sensitive issue in Sierra Leone. In case we upload our register on our website and we display age, not only address but age, there's a practice in Sierra Leone wherein some public officers tend to lower their age so that they can spend more time in active service in the civil or the public service. So if we go out and publish the voter registration details and indicate a person's date of birth, possibly we may have some repercussions from that. And employers can simply go in through our voter register on our website, and then they may start having issues with employees. So we see all of these as challenges and as sensitive information. And as a commission, we have to decide in terms of to which extent can we possibly publish personal details of citizens in the country. Now, quickly, there's not much under the election result system, because we don't hold personal details of individuals per se, but we have specific laws that allow observers or agents to observe the counting process, and also there are specific laws that mandate the presiding officer who is managing the polling site to give copies of the results for that particular polling station to political party agents. And at the end of the day, the district returning officer also has the obligation to provide the district results showing the total of all the polling station results. So basically with that, we have detailed laws that guide the process of our election results system. Now, in terms of the closing thoughts, of course, I've discussed about this particular act, the Right to Access Information Act, and how it was applied in a practical case. Now, going forward for 2018, Sierra Leone is moving towards the model of Albania in terms of having an established civil register from which the voter register can be extracted. So we are working on that. So far, in the early parts of 2016 this year, an act, the National Civil Registration Act, has been passed. In fact, it's now the big tussle in Sierra Leone. The main opposition party, they are saying that we cannot rely on the civil registration. The civil register, because it's a government, kind of a governmental process, and it may be a flawed register from which we are going to extract. So it's a big issue now, and somehow we've agreed to use a joint process wherein we work together equally with the Civil Registration Authority and generate the two registers, the voter register and the civil register, for this particular, for the upcoming elections. But for the future, of course, the law is now clear that we have to use the civil register to generate our voter register. The issue of data protection has come to the fore. It's about if you collect data, to which extent you can share the data around to other national institutions. For now, we don't have an act on this. There is an ongoing discussion or a bill on data processing with regards to this matter. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, thanks a lot. William, hit me if I go over my 10 minutes, because obviously we want to leave a lot of time for questions at the end. When we were thinking about this session, we were asking, as electoral administrators, there's probably around 5 different sets of data that you in some way manage depending on the legal framework in your country. If you, as an electoral management body, for example, also has responsibility to register political parties, well, then you're going to be managing that set of data. And really, I don't see that many privacy or data protection issues involved in having a register of political parties. Many laws around political parties are designed so that there is openness and transparency about where political parties get their funding from, who are their officers, how many members they have, etc. Another set of data would be campaign finance type data. Again, some electoral management bodies have responsibility for this. In other countries, it is an entirely different state institution that kind of monitors campaign finance matters. But again, a lot of laws around campaign finance are designed to be open and transparent and to show people exactly where money is coming from in the system. So in many ways, I don't see all that many privacy issues around campaign finance laws designed to be open. In terms of pure electoral administration data, polling center locations, voter registration centers, GIS data on where centers are, etc., I don't see that many privacy or data protection issues there. EMBs are usually naturally open and transparent in terms of publishing this type of data as to the locations where electoral events will take place. results is obviously one of the key sets of data that build transparency and openness and confidence in electoral administration, when EMBs can publish to the greatest extent possible electoral results, and I know we will come back to that issue this afternoon. But voter registration data is a thorny one when you look at the issues of data protection and privacy, because you have in many ways different stakeholders that want both copies of voter registration data and access to voter registers, which is not always the same thing. So we are curious in the results, or in the question session, to hear some of your experiences. Some countries, for example, I know, are perfectly happy to give political parties copies of the voter register. But that has often been interpreted to mean, no, we will give you boxes of paper where we have photocopied a register. We might do it by alphabet, we might do it by polling location, we might do it by constituency. But the purpose of giving you paper copies is specifically so that you cannot search online and conduct analysis and data mining and searching for individual details of where individuals are registered. And in many of those countries, political parties say, but it is precisely because we want to make individual searches to see where individual people are registered, our supporters, or other supporters of other parties that we do not think are eligible to vote, etc. It's precisely because we want to do personal searches that we want access to the database. So clearly we have a problem here now between those that want to search for individuals and those that want to prevent access to search for individuals. In my country, we don't have unique identifying numbers in Ireland, and we have this Check the Register website where you can go on and just put in any name and an address, and you will see if that person is registered to vote and where they are registered to vote. But we have a strange relationship with fame in Ireland, where nearly everyone knows where all famous people live. I can't think of a single famous person where everyone doesn't know where they live. It's, oh yeah, that's Bono's house, everyone knows he lives there. That's the guy from One Direction, we all know he lives there. So there's no real issues around secrecy of where somebody should be registered, and there's no real issues where people don't want the public to know where they're registered. But I imagine in a lot of countries it's entirely different. Famous people, other types of people absolutely do not want people to know where they live and where they're registered to vote and if they're going to vote. And indeed, we've had cases in some countries where by publishing online databases of the voter register that allow you to search for individuals, there's been actually security issues then. There's been people that have been on various watch lists, for example, for terror-related activity, where foreign governments would absolutely love to know where is that person registered to vote. And because the public knows that foreign governments would like to know where is that person registered to vote, and know that a foreign government is going to be able to find out where they're voting by doing an online check in the database, people are saying, I'm not going to turn up and vote on that day because I don't know what's going to happen at that polling location. So we have clearly an issue with transparency and what should be the limits, and it will be interesting to get your thinking on that. In other countries, for example, particularly countries where there's clear problems around identity politics or maybe ethnicity, where political parties are very closely associated with particular groups of the population, parties can often say it is precisely because we want to see where our people are spread around the country. We want to be able to search by ethnicity. We want to be able to search by gender. We want to be able to come to some sense of understanding where do we have the numbers to be able to win in particular constituencies, that we want to be able to conduct online searches or indeed have access to the voter registration database by visiting the EMB premises and sitting down and doing our own internal data mining of your database. And this is clearly in some countries required in order to build the confidence in the registration process and for political parties to buy into the process. So again, a complex issue. Even for EMBs that are happy to give access to political parties to the voter registration database, obviously William has pointed out, well, what about personal address data, date of births, etc.? Surely EMBs do not want to be in a position where they can make it easy for people to have their identity stolen, for example, by publishing birth of or date of birth data. That does allow the possibility then for identity fraud, and people can impersonate other people by making phone calls to various state agencies and giving dates of birth out to prove who they are, etc. It's a complex issue. But at what stage, even for EMBs that are very transparent and open with their voter registration data, you are faced with the question, at what stage do you give parties access to it? Do you give it to after a preliminary voter registration exercise? Or do you wait until after the challenges claims period? Or do you wait until the very, very end when the voter register is final and say, well, now you can have access? But if the political party comes back after the voter register has been finalized to say, but we've just found 200 of our supporters are not on the list, well, then it's too late to do anything about it because the voter register is finalized. If they come after the preliminary registration and say, we have found 200 of our supporters not on the list, well, the EMB will say, yes, but the process isn't finished yet. There's still an ongoing registration, or there's still a claims and objections period that you can lodge your objections there. So clearly, again, the stage at which you get access to parties is obviously an issue. Just quickly moving to the issue of other stakeholders wanting to have some degree of copies of or access to voter registers. It is no secret at all, I think, that indeed some of the EMBs in this room manage the only biometric database of citizens in their country. I can imagine and clearly envisage scenarios where state intelligence services, state security forces want access to that database. I can clearly imagine scenarios where foreign intelligence services and foreign security agencies want access to a voter registration database that includes biometric data of citizens. So it would be very interesting to hear extents to which there has been either demands by intelligence and security agencies for you to give access of a voter registration database to state security forces, or indeed where you suspect that perhaps you can detect that there have been hacking attempts from overseas, etc., by agencies looking to get access to your database. And it's a very, very serious issue, which raises the broad issue then, of course, of the general legislative environment. I believe at last count, there's only 109 countries in the world that have a data protection law. That does suggest, therefore, that there's anything from 70 to 100 countries or territories that do not have a data protection law. And in those environments, what are the steps then that an ENB takes to ensure that they are managing data correctly, that they are within their legal responsibilities and rights when they both give voter registration data to external stakeholders, or when they deny voter registration data to external stakeholders? So that's the issue of security. And then probably a final set of stakeholders that sometimes want access to voter registration data might be the private sector. In many countries, in particular some of the countries here, the database of voters that you manage can be in many ways the most advanced and developed electronic database of citizens that exists in that country. It can give the greatest indication, particularly in countries that have not done a census for a long time or do not really have accurate demographic data. It can be the most accurate portrait of where people are living. And many, many private sector companies are very keen to get access to that type of data. And I can clearly envisage scenarios where private companies offer money to electoral management bodies. Give us access to the database. We will pay you for it. It's free money in many ways. That can be money that you use to, I don't know, update the register further, clean your data, etc. And it will be interesting to hear whether there's any cases where you've had private sector coming openly and transparently offering to pay you to give access to the voter register data, and how does your law in your country around data protection and freedom of information and privacy affect that? I will stop so that we can have questions. Thank you.
Thank you all. So we'll open now for discussion, and I'll follow IFAS best practice established over the past few days, which includes please stating your name and organization when you want to raise a question or make a comment. This is also a good time to get your headsets if you have not gotten one yet for interpretation. And also, As established by IFES, we will go by section. I will start on my right, move to the middle, and go to the left. And I will take 2 questions from that side first. The gentleman in the 4th row, sort of the one right here. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Maarten. This is Joram Rukambe. I'm with UNDP as a Chief Technical Advisor based in Kenya. Thank you so much to the panelists for the rich presentations you've given us. I have always struggled to understand a definition of a person of an unsound mind. So who determines that? Is it a doctor or a judge or the police or a registration officer? I just wanted to hear from different jurisdictions that definition, because at times you look at a fellow and in your mind, he or she is of an unsound mind. But others would say it must be medically certified as such, or sometimes it must be a decision of the court. So who determines who is of an unsound mind? That's the first one. 2, are there jurisdictions where it is mandatory at certain points to conduct what we call an audit of the register? If there is no such, I want to hear from others their experiences in relation to the conduct of voter register audits. What would be the context, the rationale, and where you have done it, what has been the experience? Back home in Nairobi, in Kenya, the electoral management body is required to conduct such a process. And we would love to tap into the experiences of others as to how that is conducted, the key principles, the practices, best practices around that, if you may. Thank you so much, Maarten.
Thank you, Joram. You've added more questions to the audience. Alfonso, you have somebody there for a question.
Morning, everyone. My name is Olufunto, and I work for ISA. I was just going to ask a question regarding the issue raised about what kind of personal data can you give out? And there was one of the presenters talked about date of birth. And I think it's an interesting one because on one hand, you can say this is quite personal, but going from experiences in different countries, there are countries where civil society groups have organized independent audits of registers. And the date of birth was actually the means by which they were able to detect a number of duplications, because they had so many people on the register, similar names in the sense that my first name and my surname will be switched over, but the date of birth remained the same. So it was easy for the group doing the independent audits, to find out that these are duplications. So for me, I think the date of birth is something that needs to be released. Thanks.
Thank you very much. With those first 2 comments, I'll start with maybe turn it back to the panel. Is something you want to say about auditing in your experience, in your national practice?
For Sierra Leone, obviously, we don't have any law requiring the audit of the voter register. But I think similarly, in 2012, we can see the 2 main reasons for going biometric, first of all, is to ensure that we have a clean register, because it had been haunting us in the past. In the past, we were using some kind of a scanning technology, but it could not weed out multiple registrations. But with the biometric voter registration, with the biometric voter registration technology, it helped us to catch people who attempted to register more than once. The second aspect is that we wanted the register to be permanent and continuous. In the past, it was just a temporary register. When it's time for election, you go out, you capture data, you come in, you use that data as a register for the upcoming elections. And for the next cycle, you have to discard because you don't have the technology to update. But with the biometric voter registration system, since we have your biodata in terms of your facial recognition and also in terms of your prints, your finger or your thumb prints, it means that once you're in the register, there is no need for you sometime later to come back to be registered. So it will imply that all the commission needs to do is to update the register. So probably the process of updating the register will require questions like who else should come in, those who've turned 18, and who are those who should go out, presumably the dead. So probably the process of cleaning up the register can be likened to be some kind of an audit of the register to keep it accurate, to keep it active. Our laws, of course, in Sierra Leone, we don't have an effective department that is managing births and deaths. So you can simply, there are a good number of Sierra Leoneans who do not even have birth certificates because of the infrastructural challenges. So you can simply, as a grown-up, through an affidavit, claim a particular date of birth. In terms of taking out the dead, it is simply leaving that responsibility to the local councils, that the local councils should be maintaining a register of the dead within their localities. But how effective that is, it's another challenge. So in the aspect of the audit of the register, clearly we are not mandated to audit, but we can update, and in the process we can ask the right questions to ensure that our register is up to date and accurate. In terms of the date of birth issue, we are using biometric voter registration technology. We don't use the date of birth as a means to weed out multiple registrants per se, because the technology can weed out multiple registrants by comparing your biodata, whether it's your prints or your facial recognition. So we rely on we call it a deduplication process, a matching process wherein the details of registrants are compared and multiple registrations are picked out. The issue of the unsound mind, I'll come back to it. In Sierra Leone, it is the onus of being registered. It's not compulsory for voting purpose. It's voluntary. You have to come to the NEC, to the Electoral Commission, to get registered. So as best as possible, we open as many registration sites, but you have to come. So generally, we are guided by practical means per se. If a particular person is really a lunatic, then definitely that person, 10 chances to 1, cannot come in and come up to the registration officer to get registered and may not be able to even go through the registration process. And we also deliberately, we do not target mental homes. We have mental homes in Sierra Leone too. If, for instance, now we'll be moving over to civil registration. For civil registration, they don't have that limitation. Everybody in the country should be registered of whatever category, whatever age. So they will have the onus to even capture those in the mental homes. But for us, it's practical. We avoid the mental homes because, the spirit of the law is you have to be of sound mind before you are eligible to vote. And clearly, if someone is a lunatic, we can tell, and most of them don't even attempt to come in. If you are on the borderline, you may pass if you can go through the registration process. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to the borderline right here in the middle. Please.
Yeah, I'm Betty from Kenya. I want to build up to the question that has been asked by Joram regarding the audit of the register. And this one I actually directed to Luz. do we have internationally accepted standards that speak to the threshold of an accurate and complete register? Because we're just about to undertake an audit of our register. At what point then can you stand and say this is complete and accurate?
Before you take that, let me just see if there's any other question in this particular section. I saw a hand going up earlier on. Gentleman here in the second row. And since this is a larger section, I will take also after that the gentleman behind there, in the last row. Yep.
My name is Nzibo from Kenya, and my question is directed to Niall. When we look at elections in the third world, we are very much concerned about cost of elections. And yet there's a push towards the use of technology, both in terms of identifying while registering the voter, and when the voter turns up, also to verify that that is the voter we're using. And also we go into also the use of technology to transmit the results from the polling stations. And yet when you look at the US, the polling stations where we went, it's very much based on trust. I turn up and I say my name is so and so, and they look into the register and I'm able to vote. So if you compare the cost of elections in the US and other countries, you'll find that while we in the third world are being pushed towards use of technology and elections becoming more expensive, in other countries it's much more based on trust. So I don't know where we draw the line in terms of bringing down the cost of elections and the trust that can be built within a society or a country so as to bring down those elements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then the question in the last row there, gentleman there.
Mr. Chairman, I want to give it to the gentleman there.
You're ceding the floor to somebody else?
Merci. Je m'appelle Onésime Koukatoula, je suis de la République démocratique du Congo. Je suis membre de la Commission électorale nationale indépendante. La question soulevée ce matin est d'une grande importance pour mon pays parce que nous devrions organiser les élections cette année en novembre, mais nous n'allons pas organiser des élections cette année à cause du fichier électoral, donc la liste des électeurs. Comparativement à l'expérience d'ici et ce que j'ai entendu, dans mon pays, la liste des électeurs, la carte d'électeur fait office de la carte d'identité. Et parlant des audits, dans mon pays, il n'y a pas de registre d'état civil. Et donc, on inscrit les électeurs chaque fois qu'il faut organiser les élections tous les 5 ans. Mais il s'est fait qu'entre le moment où on arrête l'inscription des électeurs et le moment où on organise les élections, il y a plusieurs d'autres mineurs qui atteignent l'âge de 18 ans. Et comme dans mon pays, nous avons plus de 500 partis politiques, le problème de la liste des électeurs et de la transparence se pose. Il faut d'abord noter que c'est un pays très vaste et la liste des électeurs, pour la construire, le coût est très élevé. On est plus ou moins à 250 millions de dollars pour l'enregistrement des électeurs seulement. Et le problème que nous avons, c'est que la compréhension selon laquelle, comme ici, comme tout est basé sur la confiance, là-bas dans notre pays, le problème des fichiers de la liste d'électeurs pose un grand problème, de sorte que la population et les partis politiques qui sont nombreuses ont plus confiance à ce que les étrangers disent. Or, je prends le cas de l'Amérique, qui comprend qu'on peut inscrire le même jour, on peut inscrire bien avant, on peut inscrire avec la carte, estime que le problème d'inscription n'est pas perçu de la même manière selon qu'on est dans ces pays ici ou dans notre pays. Et donc, ça pose un problème. L'audit qui a été commandé, donc, en 2011, chaque jeudi, il y avait des manifestations des partis politiques de l'opposition pour réclamer l'audit de la liste des électeurs. Et on a fini par commander cet audit par l'OIF, l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie et les Nations unies, une mission concertée. Cet audit a révélé qu'il y a plus ou moins 8 millions de jeunes majeurs qui étaient absents dans la liste et plus de 1,6 million de morts, de décédés qu'il fallait extraire et des gens qui ont perdu les droits de vote et qui devaient intégrer. Et tout cela a fait que tous les partis politiques ont accepté que la liste électorale n'était pas fiable et qu'il fallait recommencer l'inscription. Et chez nous, dans notre pays, comme il est vaste, on n'a pas les moyens que vous avez, l'inscription dure plus ou moins 1 année et quelques. Ça peut aller même à 2 mois, à 2 ans, je veux dire. Et ceci a fait qu'on ne peut plus organiser les élections cette année, mais ça ne reçoit pas la compréhension de tout le monde, surtout d'autres pays européens, des autres continents, qui ne comprennent pas ces spécificités de notre pays. Et c'est ça qui fait que, quand j'entends, je suis tout ce qui se dit ici, ça dit que chaque pays a ses spécificités. Et je reviens à la question de ma collègue du Kenya qui a posé sur les normes acceptables pour accepter un fichier. Moi, je sais qu'un fichier électoral, une liste, doit être consensuelle et perfectible. Il n'y a pas de fichier parfait. La preuve, ici, on inscrit même les jours d'enrôlement. Alors, la demande, c'est celle-ci. C'est la requête que j'ai faite. C'est de demander aux institutions des Nations Unies.
Because time is running a little short, could you please conclude your comments so we can also, because the left section hasn't had any questions yet. Sorry.
I'll comment a little bit on this one.
C'est d'intervenir pour qu'il y ait cette compréhension dans nos partis politiques chez nous, qui n'est pas la même qu'ici. Or, les gens, généralement, jugent nos pays en fonction de ce qui se passe ailleurs. C'est ce que je voulais dire seulement.
Thank you very much. Lucy, you want to take the first question?
Yes, of course. Thank you for your question. I want to say that in all the process, the most important thing is transparency, of course, confidence and the trust between all the stakeholders, all the political parties that are involved in this process. As I said before, CEC is not directly responsible for the civil register. It's an interior ministry. And this is a choice that political party has decided to put the CEC in this process through auditors. And auditors are chosen by the chair and vice chair of the CEC. Is something that I wanted to say in the meeting of the CEC. In the meeting of the CEC, our part and the political party, representatives of the political party are in every meeting, and they have a lot of right in this meeting. They have right to do the question, they have right to propose for the changes in our decision, they have right to ask, they have the same right that Commission has, only the vote. The vote is excused by the representative of political party. In this case, they wanted to control how the things are going in this civil register. And only the manner that wanted through CEC is to appoint 2 auditors. And of course, these auditors respect all the international standards that have a relation with the civil register. These auditors have the right to go inside of the civil register and to put or to find and to see what's happened in this register. And after that, they proposed us or they inform us for everything they find in this register. After that, CEC has the right to take decision, and after that, this decision is going on to the civil register, and they put our direction in their job. This is the auditor's work that have done in our. I don't know, it's good or not good, but it's a solution that comes from the political party. So, thank you.
Yeah, I will speak to the question of the costs of technology and the. I've been actually fascinated over the last 5 or so years about the huge push and rush to the use of biometrics in many countries, particularly nations in Africa that are already struggling with resources. I think it all depends on the particular background and environment of the country and the politics of the country as to whether it is worth, when you balance the cost and other priorities of using biometrics or investing in other kinds of technology. It really depends on the problems that you face in your particular country, whether that is something that becomes a priority or resources should be devoted to other things. In this country, we don't have a problem of people showing up at the polls who aren't who they say they are. We have a problem of people not showing up at the polls in this country. We have one of the worst voter turnout, voter participation rates in the world, especially the developed world. The problems in this country are more about disenfranchisement and people being kept from the voting process than we do of double voting or impersonation and issues of that nature. And so the problems really aren't at the polls per se that way in terms of our use of technology. It's using technology to get more people engaged in the system, and the voter registration system has until now been a tremendous barrier, and we hope that the use of technology will actually help to get more people at least on the registration list.
Niall, you want to say something about cost and accuracy?
Yes, thank you to Commissioner Nzibo and the gentleman from Kenya. There is a session this afternoon on general role of technology in electoral administration, but I do want to say one thing about the UN's view on this matter. I mean, the Secretary General issues a report every 2 years to the General Assembly on the UN's role in supporting elections around the world, and has on a number of occasions now raised concerns about what he terms technology that may be not the most sustainable for the environment in which it's been used and the cost being devoted to that technology. I think it is absolutely inevitable that biometrics will continue to grow as something used in public administration in every country in the world. All of our passports already include some form of biometric data. If it didn't, you would not be here today, because the United States does not accept non-biometric passport data now. So we can accept biometrics, and high levels of technology will play a role and play a larger and larger role in public administration. The question is, do they have a role in elections management? And when you think of the different amount of registers that exist in any country's public administration, social security register, driving license register, passports, civil registration, a tax database perhaps, it is interesting that many of those registers in many countries do not gather biometric data, but electoral management is an area where biometric data has been gathered in a lot of contexts. There are a number of fora, such as the recent conference that took place in Addis Ababa with the African Union Commission, International IDEA, the International Organization of La Francophonie, and other fora like the ID for Africa conference that gathered people, 600 people in Kigali and in Dar es Salaam last year, that are looking at this whole role of technology in public administration and in registration, large registrations of population. And I do feel are moving towards a system where we're suggesting, should countries perhaps reserve the use of biometric data and high technology registrations of population for more foundational registers, such as like a national identity register, national population register, etc. And then have other registers of the population, more functional registers like a voter register, to come from that system, so that the system is more sustainable on a longer term basis, and where that type of data, that biometrically enhanced high technology data, can be used in a number of different public administration settings. One of the issues with that, of course, as William has noted, if that data and that database is associated too much with a government and a ruling party, well then perhaps for elections, political parties will not have the confidence in that type of process. So the final point around this then, I do feel, is that a lot of countries are trying to empower specific independent state agencies like a National Registration Bureau or a National Registration Secretariat or a National Identity Authority to be the ones empowered by law to manage that type of foundational register of the population. And if that type of agency is empowered and independent enough, and in many ways is given the type of independence that a lot of electoral management bodies are given in terms of their independence in law, it may be possible to build the political trust in that type of an agency to manage that extent of a foundational register of the population.
Thank you, Niall. We're already a little bit over time. I will take two very, very, very brief comments or questions. On the left, I see a gentleman holding his hand here in the first row.
My name is Jimbo, Luis Jimbo. I come from Angola, and I am Executive Director of Angolan Institute for Electoral System and Democracy, and also I am involved in SADC observers, African Union observers, and my country observer. Right now, my country is working on electoral registration. And through my experience, my background is conflict resolution. This is the key point of the conflict right now in most of African countries. And I am feeling that here we are talking these issues more in a private sector view, because if in this room was supposed to be here, civil society represent, political party represent, and management board and governmental, the conversation would be so very, very different. And why? And I would like to get your support on that. First of all, is that we have an electoral stakeholders and new actors, that is the private sector, that is looking for profit. When we are talking that technology increasing money, most of this money is for private sector. And so what kind of public, how the election is politics rights, is public interest, how to have a law to come up with the private sector to follow this public interest, not just in profit. Second, most of the experience that I'm seeing is that they don't, and a civic registration don't allow civil society to observe. And all involved in this conflict, civil society is calling to provide trustful or to provide report or to provide whatever to reduce the conflict. And I would like to get from you why. This is not about secret of information, but why? Because the problem is trustful. People don't trust on just on a number that the government provide to them, and they don't have any way to measure if it's true or not. In the political party in opposition is using that to argument that as a fraud, to argument during the results, they are linking with the civic registration. So I am very deeply concerned. I would like to get more experience from you how civil society can observe the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am truly afraid that we're now well over the time for this session. So I would, our panelists are very approachable, and I think they'll be happy to speak to the issue that you've raised or other questions you might have during the coffee break, which I am now been authorized to announce. Before we do that, please join me in thanking this panel for their presentations.